Hello there! Excuse the face, I have got ill again and frankly I have lost all patience with illness this winter. But anyway, I wanted to bring you my second half of my February wrap up anyway. For those of you who have been following me this month, you will know that I've been doing first novel February and also sort of a take on Femmeuary, so I have only been reading first novels by women. Every book I am going to be speaking about here is by a woman, and all of them are debuts apart from one which was an audiobook which I listened to, which was kind of an exception that I set myself. I'm kind of sad that first novel February is over for me, to be honest. I've really enjoyed it, and what's been really interesting is that, you know, there's been a broad spectrum of quality of books. I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which I wrapped up last time. I will link that wrap up down below if you want to know in-depth thoughts on that, but obviously the quality of that was astounding, especially for a first novel. And then there have been ones that have been much more the standard that you would expect from first novels, so it's been quite a broad spectrum. But what I've noticed is that it's very much, people seem to make the same mistakes in first novels. There's a lot of telling and kind of info dumping in a lot of cases, which I think is something all new writers are guilty of. I certainly get into the habit when I'm sort of stuck of doing that. But ultimately there were no books that I read that were absolutely awful, and that kind of reassures me, but also kind of doesn't, because I was hoping to see some really bad ones. But I still think there were enough little niggles in these novels to give me hope and give me heart that my writing isn't that far off. So I would definitely recommend reading solely first novels for at least a month if you are starting to write a novel yourself. I think it's a really interesting practice, and as I say, it was fascinating how I was seeing similarities between all the novels. I think that's why it would be a good idea to read a few in a chunk, because you obviously wouldn't get that benefit otherwise. But anyway, I also wanted to say that during my last wrap up, I wrapped up Stephen Fry's Making History. That was actually my book for the month that I hadn't heard of from YouTube. Obviously it's not an obscure book by any means, but I haven't actually heard anyone talking about Stephen Fry's writing on YouTube before, so that was the book that I read for that challenge. So let's get into it without further ado, me babbling on. The first book I read in the second half of the month was Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. Me and Sarah Waters don't get on, and I haven't changed my opinion of that from reading this book. I would say this is probably my favourite of hers. But I just, in all honesty, I find her writing really boring. I think she's one of those authors that so many people love. So it's just me, I just don't like her writing. I find it bland. It's about a girl called Nancy who, she lives quite a sheltered life. She works with her family in the family business. She's an oyster girl. And she starts going to the carnival with her sister, and there is a kind of transvestite act, I suppose. It's a sort of really boyish girl who dresses up as a boy, and she goes on stage and sings songs. Nancy becomes obsessed with her, and her relationship with this girl kind of takes her into the sort of sexually experimental underground. This is set in the 1800s, so obviously, you know, girls dressing as boys was a big taboo, and also, you know, sexuality, you couldn't be openly lesbian, and it looks at that. It looks at the lifestyle that Nancy is then forced to live, and it looks at kind of the sexual undertones of the society at the time. It was fine, it was okay. It was interesting, and I liked learning about the world, and I really liked Nancy as a character. But ultimately it just kind of fell flat for me, like all of Sarah Waters' books have done, really. So I don't know that I'm going to be revisiting Sarah Waters, but as I say, don't take my word for it, because I have not heard anybody else say negative things about her. So there was that one. Then was the audiobook I listened to, which wasn't a first novel, and that was Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. Now, I'm not going to lie, I didn't love this. It was fine, it was okay. I think the issues for me are that I don't really like essay collections. I find them too detached, and this is very much an essay collection. It's just a collection of Roxane Gay's writings, which I have a feeling I heard her saying before are all online in different guises for free, so if you want to hunt them down, I'm sure you can. They are just a load of essays, and I think the trouble is I went into this expecting it to be about feminism, because, you know, the title is Bad Feminist. I wouldn't say that it is about feminism. In fact, I think it's more accurate to say that this kind of focuses on race, and obviously there are essays about sexuality in there and about being a black woman, but ultimately the thing that I found most interesting in this essay collection were the essays where Roxane Gay looks at things in popular culture and looks at representation issues and things like that. I think if the book had focused on those essays, of which there were more than any other, I think it would have been a much stronger book. Whereas those essays, as it was, formed the sort of centre of the book, but they also sandwiched together with other essays which kind of seemed a bit random. Like, there was an essay about competing as a professional Scrabble player, and obviously there were the essays about feminism. I don't know, I just felt like it was a bit of a choppy book. And another issue I had, which wasn't with the book itself, but was with the audiobook, was that this was narrated by not Roxane Gay herself, which I think is always disappointing with non-fiction, but it was narrated by a woman called Laurel Lefko. Now, I have to say there was nothing wrong with the narration. Laurel Lefko did a really good job at getting into Roxane Gay's voice, but I did Google her, and I was disappointed to see that she was a white woman. And I think, given the context of the book, it's predominantly about the experience of being a black woman, and it very much focuses on race as well as feminist issues, it kind of niggled me quite a bit that it was read by a white narrator. I feel like that kind of goes against the sort of thought behind the book in a way, and also, you know, I'm sure there are black women out there who would have been happy to read this, so that was a small niggle for me. I would recommend it if you like essay collections. There were essays that I enjoyed, there were essays that I didn't, but I suppose that's part and parcel of a collection like this. But yeah, ultimately it was a bit of a disappointment for me. Then I read Cara Spray's A Song for Issy Bradley. I hadn't read any Cara Spray before this, and I've got to be honest, I don't think I'll be revisiting her. That said, I did enjoy the experience of this book, though ultimately I only gave it 2 stars. So this follows a Mormon family in the wake of their 4-year-old daughter Issy dying, and it hit me much harder than I thought it was going to, actually. I kind of knew that was the rough premise, but I didn't realise that we meet Issy when she is dying, when she is upstairs and the family don't know what's happening to her, and we sort of see her illness progress. And it was kind of gut-wrenching because I've always had a fear of just finding a loved one dead, but that's a whole other issue. Anyway, so it was gut-wrenching and it was affecting, but for me it was too much of an easy read kind of page-turner, which isn't really my kind of thing. I'd say this is probably a good beach read, although obviously the subject matter is quite dark. Issy dies pretty near the beginning, I'd say probably in the first 30 pages possibly, definitely by 50 pages in, and we then follow the rest of her family and look at how her death impacts them. The father in the family is a Mormon bishop, and we get the impression from early on that he kind of puts his church and his congregation above his family, and he continues to do that, and obviously he very much turns to faith to get him through his loss, and the rest of the family almost start to turn away from faith, especially the mum in the family. I think she's called Claire. She very much becomes very isolated, and she feels almost as though she's the only person who's actually experiencing real grief. She was my favourite character, but the very disappointing thing is that she takes to Issy's bed and she refuses to leave it, and we then lose her perspective. We lose her point of view for the best part of the book, which I thought was wrong on a few counts. Firstly, as a mother, I don't know if she would have done that. I understand that it was her grief that was pushing her to do that, but she did have 3 other children, so it kind of just didn't sit right with me that she would do that. And also the fact that we lost her point of view when I think hers was actually the strongest voice in there, and she was really getting across this isolation of feeling grief so heavily. Because we only got the perspective of her being in bed from the other characters, it almost lost believability. Whereas if we had had sections from her as well of her thoughts and what was going through her head while she was bedridden, I think it would have been much better. But overall, it was an okay read. As I say, again, not really one for me, which I seem to be saying about a lot of these. I didn't have that bad a second half of the month, but it's not something that I would rush out to read again. Then I finished Ali Smith's Free Love and Other Stories. I was really intrigued to get to this one because I think Ali Smith is one of those authors that is always sort of an inspiration for me, so I was excited to go back and look at where she started. And I have to say, this was an okay collection. There were stories in there that I really enjoyed. There was one called Text for the Day that was about a girl who had books all over her bedroom, and she ended up having a bit of a breakdown and just going out and ripping the pages out of books and leaving them behind her. And I really enjoyed that story, but for the most part these are pretty forgettable, and it wasn't amazing. This is something that I often find with Ali Smith short stories, that they kind of just don't stick in my head, or that they kind of take turns that I don't really keep up with. I think it's possible that I just don't get on with realist short story collections that well. I would say this is worth a read. It won the Satire First Book Award. So it isn't weak by any means, it just again wasn't really for me. But as I say, it was okay, and there were some definite strong stories in there. One funny thing about reading this was that obviously it was released in 1995 and there were a lot of sort of dated things in there, so you know, going into it I wasn't really thinking that that's quite a long time ago now, but like things like they would listen to tapes, or in one of the stories they go on teletext, and it's funny how dated these stories now seem. But anyway, there was that one. And the best book I read in the second half of the month was definitely Kate Tempest's Bricks That Built the Houses. It's obviously Kate Tempest, the poet that we all know already, but this was her first novel, so I counted it here, and I really enjoyed it. I don't know whether I was a little bit biased because it's Kate Tempest and I quite like her poetry. There's definitely issues, but before I go into those anyway, I will tell you what this was about. So this is about, we meet at the beginning 3 people who are running away from London with a great deal of money that we know they have robbed from quite dangerous people. And then we go back and follow them on their journey to what led them to that point. And we kind of look at all sorts of things, from social issues to drug abuse, sexuality, all the things that you would probably expect from Kate Tempest. It's very politically charged, which I really enjoyed about it. The issue for me was only that Kate Tempest has a habit of kind of going back into the past of every character we meet in a way that she doesn't necessarily need to. So like 2 of our main characters are sister and brother, Pete and Harry. We end up getting their mum's whole backstory, their stepdad's whole backstory. During those sections I kind of found myself zoning out. I think it's stuff that didn't necessarily need to be in there, and again I think it's one of those cases of info dumping that seems to be quite prevalent in most of the first novels I read. But other than that, I really enjoyed this. I think I probably have a soft spot for it as well because we went to Wales at the weekend and it took 5 hours to get there and 5 hours to get back. So all I did was read this book, and I think I'm really getting a soft spot for books that I read in short chunks of time. But I would definitely recommend this. I think you can definitely see Kate Tempest's poetic style coming in there. There's a bit that I can specifically remember because it was quite near the end, and it's about the girl Becky, who is also one of our main characters, and she kind of has this effect of everybody around her falls in love with her. That was another thing, there was a lot of insta-love in this, but I could kind of forgive it. But so everybody who meets Becky kind of develops a thing for her. She's one of those women that just commands this presence, and somebody meets her and there's a sentence that says his hips are like a temple, which you know, and there are small things like that throughout, just little snippets of poetry where you can really see Kate Tempest coming through. I think she's definitely one to look out for, and I will definitely be reading more novels from her in the future. That was everything. I hope everyone else has had a good reading month in February, and I will see you next time. Bye.